Hi, Karen. We're still in the practice session,
Yeah.
or
Hi,
so
hi,
I
Mark.
think, or so I think.
Yeah, I think I'll put my video off and I was just thinking to check how does this polls and quizzes work.
Oh, what Anjali said, people just put it in the chat. Have people just start writing comments in chat. What's her idea?
Yeah, actually I have two questions on the poll. Maybe I'll take out one.
Because the only video, there's only one poll question, right? It's how you. Yeah, I think there's only one, but I thought she wanted to put more in. I felt like there were more polls, and I only see one right now.
I created two polls, like what is when like what I have written from her notes is like, which one of the challenges are you facing? Like which is the most faced challenge in the group? I think it's there in slide 3 as well. Slide 3 or 2 or 4. Sorry, 4. Is it 4? Yeah.
Oh, and just ask people. So go ahead and. Oh, then this is a different poll. Okay, so what's your plan B to work with you?
So this, then I will take out, I have two questions in the poll. What I'll do is edit and I'll take out one question. For maybe for the slide number 4, we can just ask them to comment or something. And for slide number 5, I'll open the poll.
Sorry, I don't understand.
Slide number 4, where we are just asking which are you facing? What is the challenge that you're facing? This one, we will just ask them to, what do you say that?
Oh, if anyone has any of these,
Yeah.
okay, good. And then when it comes to this one, I'll ask again.
Yeah.
But
And
this
I will
one,
switch on the poll.
oh, then will something change on the screen? I don't know.
No, maybe I think the participants will get a small question on that thing and they just have to vote. Just select one option.
Oh, but what are the choices for this?
Yes, and the choices are EB1, O1, and other talent visas. And day one CPT, move to Canada, not sure.
Oh, okay. Then you got control of that. Okay. Never done that. We'll see how it goes.
This is my first time as well for the polls. So I've looked into a couple of videos, but yeah. I expected that each question will come separately, but these two questions are together. That's what I'm thinking. Okay.
Should I separate them?
No, no, no. In the
It's
poll,
okay.
the two questions, they are coming together, like they are launching together. It's not like one question I can ask at one time and next question the next time. They're
Okay.
coming. I don't know how to set that up. So, though. Yeah.
2 minutes. Daniel probably should show up any moment now. I hope. If not, no problem. I can talk through his slides, but he was ready. But let's just, usually he'll show up before us, I think. Let me just check. Yeah, he should be here because we are 1 minute away. I'll hit start right at 5:30, but then I'll tell everyone we're going to wait for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Make sure that people can join. Five 30. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. We are starting the webinar in a few minutes. Just waiting for everyone to join. We'll probably start at 2 minutes after 5:30 Eastern or 2:30 Pacific or where everyone's logging in. Just want to make sure everyone has a chance to log in, and then we will get started. Daniel, how are you? Let me know if you can hear. I just told all the people we are going to start in about 2 minutes. Give everyone a chance to log in.
How you doing, Mark?
Good. I just announced we have a couple minutes to go. Give people time to log in, so we'll start at 3 minutes after the half hour.
Wonderful.
2:33, 3:33, 4:33, or 5:33, depending on where you are across North America. I think I see about 13 people have logged in so far. Yeah, we'll give it a couple more minutes. And Daniel, you're in Toronto, right?
I am. I'm in Toronto, enjoying the hot and sunny weather that we're getting here. Just
Same here in New York.
wrapped up the Victoria Day long weekend, and we had oh geez, it was like 27, 28 degrees Celsius plus humidity on Monday, which is summer here. Let me think about that for a second. That's about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Doing a little bit of so for May weather in Toronto, can't complain. It was beautiful.
That's good. We're all ready for summer.
I'll be honest with you, I may have spent a little bit too much time sitting in the sun.
It's been a tough winter.
Yeah.
I say that, but it's not like you were like freezing. I mean, it's Toronto, Chicago, New York. It's not that much different.
Right. But I could probably use a little bit of a tan, so it's all good.
All right, I think we've got I see 14 people logged in. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and get started. People will drop in as they can. Some people are always running a little bit late. But the title of this webinar is how to keep your US job when the H-1B fails you, and it fails a lot of people. So let's talk about how we can help people. So what we covered today, we'll do some introductions. We'll talk about the H-1B problem. It's a big problem. And then we're going to present a solution. Daniel, we never want to be on these calls and be like talking about how bad the H-1B program is and leave everyone hanging, because everyone's going to be like, we know that. How are you going to help us? So we'll talk about some people we've helped. We call it an unconventional solution. It'll be over to you to describe that solution, how the process works, how to qualify, next steps, and we open it up for Q&A. So in terms of who we are, here's the two of us. So I'll do a quick overview of me, and I will let you do an overview of you, because you can say it best. I'm Mark Pavlopoulos, founder of CEO of Syndesis. My career has always been in tech. So I California native, grew up in San Diego, been in Silicon Valley 20 plus years, 7 VC-backed startups, none of them my own. I was always on the sales, business development teams, first salesperson hired. So tech is very, very familiar to me. I'm an American citizen, but I did live in Canada for 5 years, 2 years on student visas to get my master's. And then I was on work visas. So I too moved up to Canada and had to qualify and talk to smart immigration lawyers to get me work visas. And so far I've helped 100 plus immigrant tech workers move to Canada and get their work visas. Over to you. Oh, cannot hear you, Daniel. You might be muted.
Sorry, Mark. Thanks for turning it over to me. I appreciate it. Always a pleasure to join you with these webinars. I'm a Canadian immigration lawyer. I've been practicing now for more than 10 years, helping professionals, entrepreneurs, companies, and other individuals who are interested in moving to Canada and the United States. We do both cross-border immigration to Canada and the United States, and have a lot of experience working with you, obviously, and your team on obtaining temporary work permits and permanent residency for people to come to Canada and solve this problem that they have with their H-1Bs by relocating here. So happy to run through the slides with you and answer any questions from your audience that they may have today.
Cool. Oh, and thank you for bringing up questions. Everyone, when you're contemplating a move to a new country, or you're trying to compare where, if you're in the US and what your options are in Canada, absolutely you should have questions. So what we're going to ask you to do is put those questions under Q&A. We'll keep going through, but a question comes up and you hear me say something or Daniel says something, you're like, wait, that's what, how, why, what's going on with that? I don't understand. In Q&A, just type your questions at the end. We're going to go through them all. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use the chat for some of the polls. So we'll dive in. Problem. And this is our first poll. Do any of you have any of these problems? So any of you on the call, are you like, yeah, OPT third try, lottery third try, OPT expiring? Yep. Or are you like, nah, I'm on my first or second attempt. I got a ways to go. Go ahead. Please feel free to put that in the chat. We're just curious who's on the call. Or if you look at that and you might be looking at this saying, no, I got my H-1B. I'm good. I'm the second choice. I've got the H-1B and my green card's a long wait. Or maybe some of you might say, I'm not even in the US. I'm outside of the US. I want to find out if this can help me get a job in the US. Or I have a US job offer, can't get in the US. Is this an option? And then last, is there someone saying, yeah, here's who I am. I can't, US companies won't even make an offer because they hear they have to sponsor. They hear H-1B lottery and they're like, no, too complicated. So just want to find out if anyone on this call looks at these four and says, here's which one we are, please feel free to let us know in the chat. Just want to have an understanding of who is on this call and make sure that we're providing all the information. Okay, I see I've got OPT expiring. One person has denial. Yeah, feel free to just put the information also in Q&A, just to say like if this is what your situation is. More facts we have, the better. Give everyone a moment. See OPT second attempt, down to your last attempt. Totally understand. And one poll is enough. We've got a second one. Want to ask, for those of you who are trying to understand what your plan B is. So for example, some people are like, EB1, O1, or EB1B says one option, extraordinary talent, O1, got to go for that. Others are like, yeah, day one CPT is my solution, I'm gonna try that. Maybe on the third choice, it's like, all those solutions don't work. I'm here to learn about how to move to Canada. That's why we signed up. Tell us how we can do this. And then the fourth could be someone saying, none of those solutions are mine. I'm not sure which direction I'm going. I'm just here to learn. Let us know. I'll give you a moment to share some information there. Again, as we'll show in this presentation, different people are coming at this from different angles. We'll also walk through 4 different people that we helped covering all these scenarios. And for those of you who may have just joined, just letting you know, we're doing a quick poll here just to understand who's on the call. And what we'll do is we'll also be putting in the Q&A, you can put, once we start going through slides, if a question comes up, luckily we have Daniel, he's an immigration lawyer and a professional. He can answer all your questions, but we'll do the questions at the very end. Want to make sure everyone has some time. So I'm looking for some people describing they have an H-1B, but decades wait for a green card, H-1B second attempt denied. Other people looking for job opportunities. Okay, great. So we just shared some background. Great, we can cover all of these. All right, so I will end the poll and we will go to the next slide talking about who we've helped in different scenarios. And again, that's one of the reasons why I want to take the poll. I want to understand who's on the call. So this is with 4 of the people that we helped move. This was a dinner in Vancouver a little over a year ago. So first person who's there is Pranav. He was in Dallas, didn't win the H-1B lottery. OPT was expiring. His company found us and said, we do not want to lose Pranav. We want to find a way to keep him. We heard you have a solution. We had a solution. In the middle of COVID, when It was difficult to move around the world. Canada left their border open for work visas, considered critical to the Canadian economy. Pranav had to go through that unpleasant COVID test, the one we all didn't like in the first 6 months of COVID, but he got into Canada. When he joined us for this dinner, he had been there for a year and a half. He's like, I have my Canadian PR. And then he shared a story around the table of how he got it so fast. The other people had just moved. Next person, Kanwal Jeet, he had an H-1B. And I'm like, Kanwal Jeet, I know the answer, but tell me. You have an H-1B, people are trying so hard to win the lottery, you won it. And his comment was, over 25-year wait for a green card. He's like, how can I live this way? How do I live with this uncertainty? 25 plus years to wait? He's like, my career's over by then. And he's like, I saw one of your webinars, Mark. I understood that if my company was bought into this process, you just move me across the border and then I get into the Canadian immigration system. And then I'm going to get the Canadian green card, PR, and then Pranav's like a year and a half, maybe 2 years. He's like, I'll take that solution. Next, Nima, also BT expired. He did not want to return to Iran. I don't think anyone would like to return to Iran. So, but Nima was very specific. We all know the political challenges in that country. So some people, it's like, well, go home and lose the American dream. Nima had a lot more to lose. So he was very happy for a solution that got him into Vancouver. And lastly, Hua was a completely different story. Hua's situation was, he's like, Mark, I have a job offer from a California company. I'm far in the interior of China. They couldn't get me into the US and they refused to employ me remotely. They said too many hours time difference, crossing the international date line. They're like, that's not interesting to us. They said, our team is in California. We need you in time zone. If we can't get you to California, we need you on the same time as our team. They found us and Hua's like, this worked out perfect. I didn't have to get into the US. I got to Vancouver. Close enough. Now I'm on the same time zone as my team. You gave me a solution when I didn't have one to get into Canada. My original choice was trying to get into the US. He's like, I got the cool job. I earned it. I'm just doing it remotely from Canada because US immigration is too difficult. I'm sure everyone on this call understands that and would agree. So just want to give you a quick overview. These are the situations where we can help people. That's why we asked the poll and understand who's in the situation. What I'm seeing is quite a few people cover most of these bases. All of these are who we can help, the people who we can help. So what is our solution? You're like, great, how does this work? What we do is, Syndesis is a Canadian corporation. We have permission from the Canadian government to sponsor Canadian work visas. And we do that. Been doing it for 6 years. So what we do is we're doing two things. First, Daniel will walk through in a few slides how the Canadian work visa program Global Talent Stream works. You have to qualify for that. Once you qualify and you get that work visa, and Daniel's going to walk you through how that works, then we get you into Canada. Daniel describes the process. Why we say these steps down here is this, sometimes it takes a while for this process to sink in. You get the work visa, you fly to Canada, drive to Canada, move to your new apartment or house, you take your laptop with you. You've got the same job. You've got the same, you're using the same laptop, same US boss that was on your Zoom or Teams call. You're going to see them again. Most likely you're in the same time zone. The only difference is you're just across the border in a country with a better immigration system. Nothing changes else in terms of your work responsibility. We'll walk through how that works, but basically we're just moving you into another country, but preserving a US job. And then there's people ask, well, hold on a second. I never asked for Canada. You know, I went to school in the US. I was on an F-1 visa. I came for the American dream. Why Canada? Why is this option the only thing on the table? Because Canada, if you compare Canada to the US, and Daniel's and I are going to walk through a comparison of the Canadian H-1B program to the Canadian Global Talent Stream program, Canada has much more stable immigration. Next bullet down, we have a way for you to work for your US employer remotely, same time zone. And unlike the US where there's H-4 issues, if you have a partner or spouse, Canada realized that if someone has a work visa and the other person in the household can work, they need to work. They should have the option to work. Not like this H-4 nonsense in the US. Canada says here's an open work permit for your partner or spouse. Automatic. No lottery, no additional applications. It's assumed that's the right way to do it. Also, permanent residency, as someone said in the chat, they're long wait for a green card. Canada, as Daniel will show, doesn't do their permanent resident by country of birth. They do it by you earning it. And they have a path for people to get that in 1 to 3 years. No one just wants to have permanent residence. You get to a country, you want to make sure you can stay, and then you want to make sure that you're a citizen. Canadian passport, 4 to 5 years. There's a strategy that we throw out there. We call it the boomerang strategy. This is looking ahead. This is, what if you look at the US system and said, even if I won the H-1B lottery, I have green card nonsense. This is unstable. If I lose my job, I have 60 days to find another company that will sponsor me. The Americans kick you out. Think of the boomerang strategy. You go to Canada, you take your American job with you, you work remote. Get your PR in 2 years. Get your citizenship in 4 or 5. You're holding a passport, it's Canadian. You're a Canadian citizen. Then you want to hang out in the US, come down on a TN visa. Totally different game. Canadians come down to the US, they work in Silicon Valley, New York, Austin, Boston. They do it for years, sometimes for decades. They're Canadians. You can hang out in the US and work on a TN as long as you want. You want to have that cool US career? Do it. Do it with a Canadian passport that can't be taken away. Lastly, Canada's great because they have healthcare covers everyone. How do you work from Canada? You're like, this makes no sense. How can I work in Canada? Syndesis, we're a Canadian corporation. As I mentioned, we have permission from the Canadian government to sponsor work visas. We're doing it for 6 years. We become your your employer. So basically, we have a conversation with your employer in the US and we say, look, here's how it works. It's the exact same job. The worker was sitting in LA or Boston or Miami. We'll move to Canada. We'll take over their employment as Syndesis. We'll do it exactly like what you have in the US, same salary, same number of vacation days. We'll duplicate everything you have in the US, but Syndesis is your employer of record. We'll cover all the legality, all the taxes get paid. The US company doesn't have to do anything. They simply work with us. They pay us. We pay you direct deposit into new Canadian dollar account. As it says in the next bullet, direct deposit, just like in the US. So on a Friday, you're in the US and you're like, I'm paid direct deposit in my account at Wells Fargo, Bank of America. On Monday, following weekend, you move to Canada. Now you're paid direct deposit into Royal Bank of Canada, TD Bank, whatever, it doesn't matter which Canadian bank you choose. It's the same process. You're just in Canada now. You're legally employed. We do all the HR, taxation, 401k, premium healthcare, all that stuff we handle. No stress for your employer. Been doing this for years. So that's what we always say. If anything sounds good in this presentation, we encourage you to reach out to us, have a call, learn more. Then the next step is bring your employer, your manager on the call. We'll walk them through it. That's how each one of these calls work. That's usually the immigrant tech worker on the call with their manager. The Syndesis team walks through it, how it works. Both sides are asking questions. Then there's a referral call over to Daniel. He'll make sure you qualify for the work visa. A lot of companies will do, or individuals will do that before the call, because then they go to their manager and they say, I'm qualified. I already talked to an immigration professional in Canada. They say I qualify for this visa. Let's talk to Syndesis about how we do it. Happy to have that call with you or with your employer. So Daniel, here's the fun one. H-1B, which is everyone on what this call knows. I can't say knows and likes, knows and dislikes. And then there's Global Talent Stream in Canada. So I'm going to let's walk through this together, because you've been dealing with US immigration for a long, long time. So first one, how are candidates chosen?
Yeah, you've got this right. Lottery-based system in the United States. Even after tightening up this most recent year by allowing only one beneficiary to have a petition filed on their behalf, you're still looking at lottery odds of 25%. Whereas Canada, if you qualify for the job, you work in one of the occupations, which we'll go through later, usually a tech or close related occupation, and you aren't inadmissible, meaning no criminal record or serious medical issue or prior negative immigration history, you can get a work permit. So no lottery. when you can apply, again, it's limited in the United States. You know, the process basically starts end of February, beginning of March. By the end of the March, lotteries are picked. You find out in April, and your petition is submitted by for you to start in October. If you're lucky enough to get picked. Canada, we apply online for our clients 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. I should qualify that. I don't have my associates working 365 days of the year, 24 hours a day, but you get the idea. No caps on the Canadian system versus a hard cap in the United States. For H-1B, $65,000, applicants, plus another 20,000 master's graduates. You know, company sponsorship, meaning that in the United States, your company owns your work visa and pretty much everything about you. You know, that company goes under, they terminate your employment, you got to leave the United States. Whereas in Canada, you know, you get a position approval from the company, but you own the permit, you own the process. You can actually then apply yourself for permanent residency. Once you have that permit, you don't need someone to petition for you. Yeah, time to a green card in the United States. Yeah, I think that 5 to 50 year wait time, you know, is generous. You know, we're looking now at probably 40 years. You know, with retrogression now in the United States, whereas in Canada, you know, we've had clients show up. We update their profiles for Canadian immigration. They get invited and they're permanent residents within 6 or 7 months. Sometimes they have to work in Canada for a year or two, but not uncommon to see people approved even faster than that. Approvals process very fast, you know, in Canada. From the time that somebody reaches out to us, we start working on their application and we put in their application for a work permit. You know, matter of a few months for them to show up and start working in Canada. And then in terms of permanent residency, the government has, you know, once you are invited and you qualify, the government has a processing commitment to process these applications in 6 months or less. So again, combining those two different factors on the U.S. side, it's no comparison. 99% approval rate for Canada. Mark, I mean, our own experience, I'm trying to recall even a situation where we've had a refusal working together. I know that you put.
I should have put 100% because I wanted to. I'm trying to think. It's like medical or criminal record. Maybe that showed up once, but in terms of the Canadian government saying no, no.
No,
You're
no.
right.
Usually we screen candidates in advance. Again, it's about eligibility and admissibility. It's not about lotteries and getting selected. The Canadian system is it's very transparent. We know before we apply what the criteria are for the application. You know, and it wasn't too long ago when you know, Donald Trump was president of the United States that he issued the Buy American, Hire American executive orders, and suddenly you saw H-1B approvals plummet. Same applications that lawyers have been filing, same year after year, and suddenly you saw rejection rates 20, 30, 40% climbing and climbing. We don't have that really in Canada. You know, what changes about our programs is generally not the way that officers conduct their assessments. Programs can change, but not necessarily the ways officers conduct assessments. That is independent from the executive branch. That's all done at the bureaucratic level. And one thing about Canada is it's very bureaucratic. So to tell a bureaucrat to change the way that they do their job, they're probably not going to listen to politicians. But in any event, we haven't seen any difference in the last 6-7 years of working together on this. The work visa fees, I mean, this is really more for the employers. You're paying a whole lot less. I think these are maybe the 5 to 6K global talent stream. You're looking at all-in costs, including government fees, maybe in US dollars. And the green card fees, yeah, again, for Canada, the worker can pay absolutely the worker can pay the fees to fund their own immigration. It's not an employer-based petition. So big differences all around, faster,
Yeah.
easier, quicker, less expensive. Um, and as we'll find out a little bit more later, I'll go through targeted to tech workers.
And I just want to emphasize something, Daniel, because I get these questions, you probably get these questions all the time. There's so many people, and probably I would think most people on this call, and of the hundreds and hundreds of people you and I have spoken to over the years, what I see a continual theme is someone will say, okay, in the US, they'll start the sentence off of in the US, and we'll always be like, for example, they'll say, well, in the US, Mark, my company has to apply for my permanent residence, so will you help me with permanent residence? And I'm like, in the US is just how the US does things. I'm an American citizen. There's things we do here. It doesn't mean that that's what flies in other countries. And I think one of the biggest shocks I think we see is when we tell a new immigrant to Canada, you don't have to ask Syndisa's permission for your permanent residence. Your permanent residence, your Canadian green card, it's your life. You take control. Your employer does not get involved. Do you want to be a permanent resident of Canada? Then you talk to an immigration professional like you, Daniel. You guide people through it. You show them the fastest way. They get it. The only thing that's asked for in Global Talent Stream is, can you send over your work, the employment contract that you have a job? You put that with the application. There's like, we find that people are confused. Like, well, wait, don't Syndesis, will you do all these things? And we're like, no, it's not America anymore. That's an American thing for the company to have to apply for your permanent residence. Canada lets you do it on your own. And then there's like this like confusion of like, well, in the US, we're like, that's the US, you left. I think that's an amazing thing about Canada. Same thing when it comes to green card. Sorry, I was actually referring to permanent residence. It's like you do that on your own. You are in control of your permanent residence, not your employer. In the US, it's almost like you're handcuffed. Like the company's like, well, we have to do all this extra work. That's another thing that comes up before we jump to the next slide. This number here, 10 to 20,000 for a work visa. When I talk to US HR execs, I'm like, how much money did you set aside for the worker for the next 3 to 5 years? On the low side, they'll say 10 to 20,000 in legal fees. What I'll then hear is like, well, we have another 10 to 20,000 set aside after they win the lottery. There's more green card fees. They've put aside this big pile of money because they expect that's how complicated it's going to be. When the US employer talks to us and they see these numbers, they're like, that's all? That's it? And we're like, it's Canada. Lower cost, faster immigration is possible. So that's definitely what Canada has. But just want to leave with the thought, Canada puts you in control of your immigration future, not your manager, not your company. Daniel, over to you to give a quick overview of some of the programs.
Yeah, so I think the end goal for most is permanent residency, perhaps citizenship. I have here a discussion forthcoming regarding Canada's permanent residency system and how it works, and how this global talent stream that we've been talking about, these temporary work permits, will feed into that. So I'll give a quick overview of our permanent residency system, talk about the pathway to citizenship. We get questions about provincial nominee programs, so I'll highlight a few of those to get us going. And then hopefully we'll be able to have some time to take some questions from people and answer some of the audience's live questions that they've been asking. I have been paying attention here, and I'm actually quite curious to delve into some of those as well. So without further ado, our permanent residency system in Canada is points-based. People are assigned points for various factors: age, education, language test scores, numbers of years of work experience outside of Canada, inside of Canada, family relationships with other Canadians, arranged employment with a Canadian employer, educational attainment. All of these different factors, you get points, which all have to be verified and assessed before you apply. But basically, what a candidate should look to is how can they maximize their points on this system, and once doing so, determine if that score that they have obtained or can obtain will be competitive against others who similarly want to immigrate to Canada. All right. So the key word, I guess, that I would use to describe our system is it's a competition, right? It's not a lottery, and it's very transparent, but it's a competition. So when clients ask me, how many points do I need? I often turn around and say, well, let's take a look at how many you can get if you do A, B, C, D, and then do all of that. You want to maximize your score and you want to get as high as possible. Our Canadian immigration system also focuses on certain types of candidates. For example, Canada has an occupation list. If you have work experience in one of the occupations on the occupation list, your chances of being selected increase. So why is that? Well, the competition pool is smaller. They basically say, we're only going to invite, let's say, STEM workers, and then they'll skip over everyone else in the competition pool who doesn't have a background in STEM. And they conduct other draws as well, transportation, and skilled trades. But for the purpose of this audience, know that there is a pathway for workers who have experience in science, technology, engineering, or mathematics occupations. Well, if that sounds like you, then your competition pool is actually smaller than the general pool, which means that you have a greater chance of being selected. Okay. Now, the process of receiving a selection involves inputting your information into a profile, or what we would call like a resume, to the government, and that allows you to express your interest in coming to Canada. Before you can even do that, you have to complete a language test. You must have your education credentials assessed by an official assessment agency. And I would highly recommend you have your work experience verified, right? So a lot of people say, okay, I get the language test part. I have to go take a language test. I can't create my profile without it. I get the education assessment part, the government profile that it says I need a reference number for the education assessment. What do you mean by having my work experience verified? So this is where a lawyer will come in and will collect documents and information from you. Your pay slips, if you're in the United States, your W-2s, your tax records. We will also take a look at your job description, help you draft a description that aligns with Canada's occupation classification codes, and then match it to one of the codes, hopefully that's on these in-demand lists, right? So we are involved in the process of verifying that you have the work experience and documentation to back that up. Without the documentation, you can put whatever you want in the profile. You can say, oh, I've been working for 10 years as a senior manager, an engineering manager, but I've been paid by cash under the table and at this company that no longer exists. I would say, well, too bad, so sad. Nobody can vouch for it. You have zero documentary proof. We could create a profile for you, but now we have an application based on nothing. So would you like to do that or not? Now, obviously, it's not that extreme. We're usually looking at simpler cases with workers who have, the payrolled employees, the records exist, and often we're just trying to make sure we align it with the right occupation code. What, for example, the United States refers to as software engineers, we don't call them software engineers in Canada. We actually call them software developers. And people say, well, that's something else. That's a computer application. No. A software engineer and a software developer in Canada means something different. In the United States, it's generally, computer systems engineers are what Canada refers to as software engineers and designers. It's just a different system, different classification code. And so we try to match them up the correct way. We also have a more expanded occupation list now, where the government broke it down even farther. So used to be that software engineers, or those computer applications engineers in the United States, would be categorized in Canada in such a way that it would also include data scientists and other occupations, machine learning scientists. Now Canada's actually broken them down into further occupations. So it's a little bit more complex than even it was a couple of years ago, since they've introduced the new classification system. But it's a big part in our job is to make sure we get the right code, because you don't want to input the wrong code, submit an application for permanent residency, and then have it refused merely because you picked the wrong code. You picked 21323 and you should have picked 21322. It can be as simple as that, but I've seen refusals for that reason. And so this is actually an incredibly important part of the application process. And you need to select the right code right from the beginning. If you select the wrong code at the beginning, it'll make things much more difficult for you later on. You could have a mismatch between your work permit and the code that you put in your profile, and it can be quite a mess. And you lose out on the opportunity to gain points, or worst case scenario, you'll just get flat out refused. Assuming you do the process the correct way, and we assess you and we believe that you're competitive, and you come to Canada, you have your work permit, you meet all the qualifications for permanent residency, you're invited to apply, we put in your application, processed in 6 months, and you become a permanent resident. You then have an obligation to reside in Canada as a permanent resident. So this is also very important for your audience, Mark, that I'm sure you're aware. When you move to Canada through the system, you're moving to Canada permanently. In some cases, you can straddle the border. Very difficult, very challenging to do so. We need to coordinate both your Canadian and U.S. status. For example, somebody who has an H-1B, they don't want to necessarily give it up, or they need to cross the border and to live and to work in Canada and the United States. There's a way that that can be done, but it's very challenging and really requires planning to make sure that works. But for the most part, what we're talking about is to come to Canada, to reside in Canada, and to stay in Canada on a fairly permanent basis. The criteria that you have once you have permanent residency, that you stay in Canada for a minimum of 2 years in every 5-year period. Translates to 730 days over a 5-year period. But for citizenship, in order to qualify, you have to physically reside in Canada for a minimum of 3 years. So that's 1,095 days, and file your taxes, become a tax resident in Canada for 3 of those 5 years in that 5-year period. If you meet those two benchmarks, you can then apply for citizenship. So eligibility in 3 years, that's absolutely true. You come to Canada as a temporary resident, or you transition to permanent residency, and then within 3 years, you're now eligible to apply for Canadian citizenship. That process takes about a year. So as you can see here, it's very feasible, as you pointed out before, to become a citizen in 4 to 5 years. I think in one of your earlier slides you mentioned that. Let's maybe flip to the next slide, Mark, and I want to talk about how this fits in with this global talent stream process. Okay, so what often happens, as you've described already, you have an American employer, and you're in a long wait for a U.S. green card if you're lucky enough to win an H-1B anyway. If not, then your OPT status is maybe expiring, or you have a job offer from outside of the United States or Canada. You're located in India or China, and your company just wants to relocate you to Canada. So how does that work? All right, so we start, as you say, by examining the job offer that's been made. We confirm the occupation code. We confirm that it meets the wage level required by the Canadian government, and there is no need to demonstrate a labor shortage. So for those of you who are familiar with the labor condition application process in the United States, where your employer has to demonstrate that there is a need for a foreign worker because they couldn't fill the job with an American, we don't have that in Canada. We do, but not for this process. It's exempt from that process of needing to demonstrate a labor shortage. Instead, we have to show that your hiring is beneficial to the Canadian economy, and Mark's company has already done that. They've done that repeatedly, and so they're therefore approved multiple spots to bring in foreign workers. So that part has already been done for you. You just need to have a job offer from a Canadian company that's willing to say, okay, we'll hire Syndesis to then hire you, and we'll get you a work permit for Canada. Usually from the time that we're introduced to a candidate, where we screen the candidate's background information, review the contract, put in the initial position approval called the Global Talent Stream application, you're looking at a period of about 3 weeks by the time we get an approval. After we get that approval, we then file an application for a work permit. While we're waiting for the approval, we're working with the candidate on obtaining all the documents needed, passports, resume, education documents, and anything else that may be needed, confirmation of previous employment, police record checks if they're needed, medical exams if they're needed. And all that's being done while we're waiting. And we file the application. Depending on your location, you could be waiting anywhere between 4 weeks now. I think we've seen really fast approvals out of the United States, 4 or 5 weeks recently. Could be about 2.5 months if you're in India or China right now. So pretty fast. Once you get the approval, you then submit your passport for visa stamping, and you get an approval letter. We plan a date and time for you to come to Canada, show up, present your documents, you're issued your permit, you start working right away. After that, you then have to work for sometimes a period of time to then qualify for permanent residency, but you're given a 3-year working permit. So we have 3 years to accomplish what most people either accomplish on the day they arrive. In other words, they get the points they need from having that arranged employment, or after 1 year work experience. As you also pointed out, your spouse can get an open work permit. Unlike the United States, if you are in a romantic relationship with somebody living under the same roof as them, we call that in Canada common law partners. If you've done that for a year, they can also qualify for a work permit. So you don't even have to be married. You wouldn't believe how many times that we start the process, we're working with someone, and then they, oh yeah, I have a boyfriend, girlfriend, partner that I live with. How long have you been together? 5 years. Oh, they're on their own H-1B, and they've been working in the United States. I say, guess what? They can accompany you to Canada, start working, and you'll both qualify for PR. And they're in shock, right? What do you mean? So they didn't even know that they could qualify, and the whole idea of something like common law is foreign to them. So there's a lot of education that happens along the way in this process too, when we're walking clients through the process. If you want to flip to the next slide, perfect.
That word qualify, you said. I
Yes.
thought, trigger, how do I qualify for this global talent stream work visa?
Yeah. So these are the general criteria. I think this is mostly from your company. When you do you and your employees do basic assessments, you're looking for, are you working for a U.S. or global company? You can't be self-employed, right? You can't sponsor your own job. It effectively amounts in this situation to paying syndesis to pay for a job offer for yourself. So that doesn't work, but you have to be employed by someone else. You could be a minority shareholder in a company. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as the other partners have a controlling interest and control your job. So that's okay. You have to generally be working in a tech or a tech-aligned occupation. I can show you the list of some examples on the next slide. Base salary about 65,000 USD, translates roughly to 80,000 Canadian. I think 85, it may be a little bit higher these days. Canadian dollar has actually been going down, but what we're starting to see is revisions in Canada as wages are going up. So you're probably looking at wage levels now a little bit higher than that. But the vast majority of workers who are already working for U.S. companies are getting paid a lot more than that already. I mean, you're probably seeing salaries of 120,000 American dollars. That's well above, and those are often just the low end. And those are usually well above what's required in Canada, even when we convert to the Canadian equivalent. I think for most locations, for example, in Toronto, just over 90,000 for a software developer, about 100,000 Canadian dollars for a software engineer, at 74 cents to American to $1. You can do the quick math. About 74,000 American dollars for a software engineer, 70,000 Canadian US dollars for a developer. So a little bit higher than that 65K, but same point. US company wants to keep you. I think that's obvious. They wouldn't be doing that without you. Your job is 100% remote, no travel. We say that sort of to emphasize the point that you're coming to Canada and permanently, but you can still get a B1, B2 visitor visa. You can still maintain your H-1B if you need to visit and work from time to time in the United States to go for important meetings. The idea, though, is that you are relocating to Canada on a permanent basis. The strategy makes absolutely no sense if you're planning to come and then hang out in both countries 50-50. You're not going to get your permanent residency or citizenship. Really, citizenship being the goal here, and that's a problem. Now, Mark, you listed current U.S. employers small and medium sized with no Canadian subsidiary. I think that's more of a
Yeah.
practical concern. Maybe you want to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I do for a second. Thanks. Because sometimes we'll see someone come to us saying, oh, they'll throw some big name corporation. Oh, I'm with Google. I'm with Meta. I'm with Ford. I'm with Caterpillar. I'm with Microsoft. And what we always say is, if you're working for a large corporation, you need to go back to your manager and ask about transferring L1s. You have a conversation with them. If your company has a corporation in Canada, have the conversation internally. We cannot help you. Most of those big companies are not going to work with us. What we see most happening is a mid or small size company in the US, VC-backed companies, private equity-backed companies, they don't have a Canadian office. So what's going to happen is then when we get your employer on the phone, we'll say, you don't have to set up a corporation in Canada. We're an employer of record. We have a permanent presence in Canada. We employ people in Canada for American companies, and we sponsor work visas. No corporation required. I just put this in there because sometimes when we see a big name, we always know that we're going to deliver bad news to that person, saying Ford and Microsoft aren't going to work with us. If they wanted to move you, you got to talk to them internally. And the other side of it is, as you pointed out, some people are self-employed. Some people will say, well, I want to move to Canada, but my company, they're not bought into it. Unfortunately, your company has to be bought into it. We have a policy, we do not charge the worker. It's illegal. There's one obvious reason. So what we need is your US company to sign an agreement with Syndesis to be your employer of record. Then we'll handle everything behind the scenes. As Daniel pointed out, sometimes people come to us and say, okay, my company was willing to do that, but in terms of legal fees, what can we do? And as Daniel's always informed me, the worker is allowed to pay for for Daniel's fees on the immigration side, but not for Syndesis fees. And sometimes that happens. The company will be like, okay, look, let's split this. You, worker, take care of, work with Daniel and his firm, take care of the fees. We'll work with Syndesis and take care of the cost. But that's why we always say that there has to be an agreement there. We are working with your firm. I think we're down to the last couple slides, and I'm sure people are looking forward to the Q&A. I think here's some positions, Daniel, because you always point this out. Every once in a while, I'll come to you or my team will come to you and say, we don't think this person qualifies as a business analyst, or that they're not in a pure tech role. And you're always like, stop, let me look. Let me look at their CV and resume. Let me look at their experience. And most often we get surprised when they're like, no, they'll qualify. Send them over. Let's talk. And the answer becomes, we send people to you for the evaluation, because sometimes you've as you pointed out, there's creative ways. Oh, like the Canadian version of an L1, there is extraordinary talent. There are ways to make this work.
Yeah, I honestly have nothing to add to that, but this is just a sample. We can produce a list probably of a couple hundred job titles here, but this gives people an idea that there's lots of different job titles that are eligible.
We'll go to I think we always put this in here. How does Canada handle layoffs? Because then people are like, I don't want to be in Canada and be hit with the same issue of like in the US where, oh, I got laid off, 60 days to find another sponsor or kicked out of the country. That question comes up of like, wait, am I going to be treated that way if things go south? And you've always pointed out, nope, it's not the US.
Yeah, that's right. You have in Canada first something called temporary resident status, and so that's on the document that you're approved as a worker, you're approved status, and you can remain in Canada for the entire period of time that you've been approved. The question is then, what can you do with that status? So your working permit authorizes you to work for a specific employer in a specific position and at a specific location or in a specific city. And if you do lose your job, then you don't have to leave, but you can only work for that employer. What's really, I guess, cool about working with Mark's company is, let's say that you are employed and you have a job as a software engineer, and you're working for a company, but the company is in the United States, but you're working through Syndesis. So what actually happens in the situation when the company in the United States decides they want to terminate the employment? Well, guess what? That work permit with Syndesis is still valid. If you find another job with another US company to work remotely that's willing to employ you in Canada through Syndesis, Nothing. You can keep working. It's the same employer. Syndesus is your employer of record. Nothing has changed, right? There are situations where perhaps, Mark, you have to lay them off for a period of time because there's a shortage of work. And then until they get the new employer onboarded with Syndesus, there may be a gap. But you've been still working with the same company in Canada. Even in the worst case scenario where you cannot continue to work for whatever reason with Syndesus here, you're unable to find an opportunity, they're unable to find one for you, and you go and you find another opportunity with a Canadian company. It's really useful to be able to say, yeah, I have a work permit. I got it through this program. It was relatively simple. Let me introduce you to my Canadian lawyer or Syndesus, and they can describe it. And maybe they can help you out here and help get you a work permit for Canada.
Yeah.
You know, but these are a couple of key features of the system that a lot of people, I think, have trouble understanding. Is when you lose your job with the U.S. company, you still are authorized to work and work for Syndesus. Find a new U.S. company to fill the shoes. You don't have to get new shoes. So I think that's a really cool thing about this this particular strategy you put together, Mark.
Thanks. And now time for Q&A. So again, if there's something good opportunity, you can scan this form. We can get a call set up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look in the Q&A real quick, and then while this form is up, we're going to start going through some of the questions that I see stacked here, because there's always, I will close the poll.
And Mark, I saw that I just marked a few of them off as answered earlier that had you know, you sort of addressed in your earlier discussion.
Okay, so thanks for that. So this one here by Subhajit Bhaskar, I'm not sure exactly what the question is, because it's describing a situation where both are in the US. He's got deep experience in data engineering, machine learning, natural language processing, and it's a specific question about H-1B visa. What are options about finding a career? So it sounds like he's in a position where he can't work due to US immigration. So in this situation, then he doesn't have a job. The ideal situation is, so now a US company's not going to hire him, because they're going to be like, wait, there's a situation with his work visa. This one's kind of tough. So our whole focus in this call is moving your job when you have it from the US, but you've lost the lottery. So what we can't help yet is finding you a job in Canada. Subhajit, what I'm gonna throw out there is, later this summer, we're going to launch a labor marketplace. So what we're looking to do, this is completely separate from Syndesus, but we have people who come to us and say, I don't have a job anymore. I lost my job in the US. I had to move back to India. I had to move back to Pakistan. Or people saying, I can't even get into the US, but I want to. We are working on a labor marketplace where we are going to connect you with companies that would hire, and then we would move you straight from where you are to Canada, sponsor your work visa, and then you work remotely for an American company. So what I will do is I will add your email to the list when we launch that later this year. Hopefully we will have job opportunities, but unfortunately at the moment we don't have one now. So next one I'm going to go is, what about Canadian economy collapsing and no housing and no jobs? Okay, it's never that bad. Is housing expensive in Canada? It is. I live in New York. Is housing expensive here? It is. So to put it bluntly, Vancouver and Toronto are expensive cities. I had a call with two of the people we moved, and I'm like, oh, I thought you were in Toronto. They're like, nah, Toronto's too expensive, Mark. We moved to Ottawa. Houses are 1/3 less we bought up here. I'm not living down there. It's just too much money. And I'm like, oh, okay. You can move anywhere in Canada? Yeah. You don't have to be in the two most expensive cities. Calgary housing prices are about half of what Vancouver is probably. Or you can pick a smaller city. You can live anywhere. If you have a remote US job, people come to us and say, I want to pick the place in Canada where there's lowest taxation. We're like, Alberta. Or I want to pick the place where there's lower housing costs. I'm like, Halifax. You can move around. So Canadian economy not is housing expensive? Yes. Is our jobs limited? In our situation, we're talking about moving your job from the US. So you show up in Canada with your six-figure US job. Again, that is an option we are taking care of. So 37-year-old person, Daniel, this comes up because we talk to people who are quite a bit older and they're like, okay, then the points are working against me. But then correct me if I'm wrong on this, but if we move your job to Canada from the US, you get 50 points. Each year you work in Canada, you get more points. So maybe you work in Canada for 3 or 4 or 5 years, maybe, to get enough.
Yeah, maybe, but it's probably not necessary for someone who's 37 to be working that long. One thing we haven't picked up on is that, in addition to the general draw or the general draws run by the government of Canada, there are these occupation-specific draws. So you're not competing against all the candidates necessarily in the pool. And so if you're just looking at what the scores are required and you're only looking at the general draws, kind of missing the opportunities that you might have through the STEM draws. But then the other thing is also, depending on where you relocate to in Canada, you might qualify for what's called a provincial nominee program. And in some cases, like in Ontario, you don't have to do anything to qualify. You just put your application in for express entry, you wait, and the Ontario government will go and actually seek out the next tranche of candidates. So if you can imagine, the federal government picks 3,000 STEM workers with scores of 490 points and above you, and you're saying, oh, well, mine's 475. Well, then the Ontario government comes and they pick the next tranche. They pick 470 to 490, now you're picked. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a score of 550 if people are paying attention to the general draws, or 540 points to get picked. You can actually be competitive with a score that's a lot lower. And as you pointed out, you become more competitive. In other words, you get more points the longer you're working in Canada. You lose a little bit as you age, but the 50 points from arranged employment plus another 35 points in your first year, 13 again. There's multiplying. There's other factors too that those points can actually get even higher than that. But there are situations, I suppose, if someone is over the age of 45, that they would have to work for several years. But we're usually finding provincial nominee options even in those situations beforehand. So it's not so dire for someone who's 37. I'm older than 37, and I don't like being told that I'm old by Canada's immigration system. So let's continue. You and whoever the anonymous attendee is, we're still young. If you're younger than me, you're still young, and we'll go with that.
Thanks. This taxation one, double tax, this is a good question because what it shows, there's an intent. So the person who asked this, I'll give you an example. When I moved to Canada as an American citizen, I was working up there. My thought was, am I going to stay? I don't know. And so in that case, because I hadn't committed, then I was filing in the US. What we're offering here isn't a parking situation. It's a life change. It's a country change. Our idea is it's a one-way ticket. So what happens is when you're in the US, pick a state. Let's say you're in Texas, you're in Dallas, and you and your employer come to us and you're like, look, I already talked to Daniel, I qualify for this global talent stream. And the company's like, okay, I'm picturing right now, we work with a company in Dallas, we're doing multiple people out. So the conversation is, you will leave the US on a certain day before your OPT expires, or just if you're like, no, that's not my situation, I just want to leave because I'm never going to get a green card. The day you leave the US, you leave, you're gone. You're not hopping back. You don't have your house in Dallas and you're going back and forth to it. You go to Canada, your company actually terminates you. They terminate your employment, they pay out your vacation. The next day, syndesis, it's a mere job. So what a lot of people do is like, okay, on a Friday, I like quit my job I'm still with the same company, but on Monday I start, fly to Canada, get my apartment on the weekend, and Monday start with syndesis. It's the same job, the same pay, the same laptop, the same boss, but your offer letter is with syndesis Canada, and there's a work permit attached. You've quit your job in the US. But what we're doing is we're mirroring that job. You start doing the same thing the following week. You are now paying taxes in Canada. You are paying into Canadian healthcare. You are a Canadian taxpayer. The door in the US is shut. The IRS is no longer concerned about you. Unless you're saying, hey, I'm going to do this for 3-4 years, I got assets in the US. People come to us from Silicon Valley, anywhere saying, I own property in the US. I did really well. I bought some real estate. We'll connect you with a cross-border tax person who's experts in how to do that. We can work with you on that because some people say, I'm going to keep my assets in the US, but I'm going to try to get Canadian permanent residence and citizenship, and then who knows what I'm going to do. It becomes a tax situation. But when you're living in Canada and you're working for Syndesus, we're paying your taxes to the Canada Revenue Agency. That's their version of the IRS. You don't have a job in the US anymore. Therefore, you owe no taxes in the US. You are committed to Canada for as long as you work there. So no double taxation. Is it only limited to H-1Bs or open to F1 holders? When I think of someone on F1, unless you're F1, I think student, OPT is you've graduated, you're on OPT for 2 or 3 years, then you're trying to get an H-1B. Everyone we're working with usually has a job, is working, and something went wrong with the lottery. Either they lost the third time. Some people even lost a second time. It just says, get me out of here. Why am I staying in the system? I just want to move. Your OPT status doesn't matter to the Canadians. Your H-1B status doesn't matter to the Canadians. It's your decision. Where are you in that continuum? Do you not want to wait for your third try? Do you have to leave the US because you lost in third try? Do you have an H-1B, and the idea of waiting 40 years for a green card sounds ridiculous? Are you not even in the US, but you have a US job offer? Any of those situations work. All of those are fine. And I know I want to be respectful. I know we're running a bit late here, so I'm going to go a bit fast. On PNP, I think, Dan, I'm gonna kick this one to our next call, because our next call, we're gonna do a webinar. We'll walk through Canadian immigration options in depth. So I want to skip this one. To get a Canadian work permit, do I need a subject language test? Over to you.
Usually not. Depends on your country of residence. Those who are resident in the US don't need one.
Great. Oh, this one's interesting. You got the H-1B, won the lottery in the US, got an open. This maybe one of those people got one of those 10,000 work visas, and had the opportunity to move to Canada. The question then becomes, the first question I would ask this person is, how long is your wait for a green card? Maybe this person is like, no, I'm not Indian national. Maybe they say like, look, I'm from Pakistan. I can get it in 2 or 3 years. No, look, I'm coming in from Bangladesh. I'm coming in. I am not under that crazy number that Indian nationals are stuck with. In that case, it might be like, then you're not faced with any pressure to move. The question becomes, are you an Indian national, and do you have an extremely long wait for a green card in the US? So what if you have the H-1B, you lose your job, it's gone. Something goes wrong in the US immigration, they're going to kick you out. The idea then becomes, you come to Syndesus, we get your employer on the call, and you say, I want to move to Canada with my same US job, but let me get Canadian PR, Canadian citizenship, and then 4 years from now you can say, what do I want to do? I got my citizenship. Hey, I like Florida, I want to move back to the US, then do it. What we're talking about, chance, is get your Canadian, get anchored in Canada with PR and citizenship, ultimately with citizenship that can never be taken away. You can see how the Americans are with their green cards, long waits.
If I can add quickly to that, Mark.
Oh, please.
I was going to say that individual, like you said, speak to your employer. You don't have to wait for a global talent stream approval. If you've already got this, you can start working tomorrow for Syndesus, move to Canada, see what your points are like after you're working in Canada. And if you need more points, we can still go get you a global talent stream approval, and then you'll get another 50. So it's like, yeah, the H-1B pilot program is great because you can now basically go to your employer. Oh yeah, and I can do this tomorrow. So they don't even need to pay any work permit fees. They're now just paying whatever your PEO charges.
Yeah, Daniel, thanks for correcting me, because I made a mistake there. I'm so used to us sponsoring work visas, and this person's one of the 10,000 saying, not necessary. I got that. So I think our sales team has had some calls with people in that situation. Our conversation then is, as you said, forget the work visa, forget all that application process. Show up here in Canada, pick your favorite city. So Syndesus is 2 things. Number one, we're an employer of record in Canada. We employed Canadians in Canada who work remotely for US companies. We charge a small flat fee every month to US company. We do have the ability to sponsor work visas. In this case, this person's like, I don't need your work visa. I just need the employer of record business because I want to be, if you're employed in Canada, you got to pay taxes in Canada. You want your taxes paid. You want to be eligible for healthcare in Canada. You have to be a Canadian taxpayer for that. You want to pay into the Canadian system. We, as an employer of record, that's an easy one to do. That can be done over the course of 48 hours. Now we're employing you in Canada. Now you're part of the Canadian tax system. That's an easy solution. So in that case, if you're asking how we benefit, we just have the ability to help you. We're just not sponsoring your work visa. You're one of the few who got the 10,000. If company's not ready to work with your company, but sending on closed work permit, I'm not sure if I understand this.
Yeah, I get it. It's an immigration question. It's basically the person's probably working in the US. They have a subsidiary. They're going to switch them to Canada for a year, and after 1 year, they're going to get them back in the US on an L-1B. I'm not sure if they mean that they're going to come to Canada and then switch to another company. I mean, is getting a closed work permit for 1 year beneficial? I mean, yes, if you want to stay in Canada, but if your company is planning on getting you a 1 year permit and then transferring back to the US on an L-1B, are you asking if that's beneficial from a US immigration perspective? You need to, speak with your employer about the strategy here. Working in Canada for 1 year will give you more points. It's a lot better to be working in Canada for 1 year with a closed permit, valid longer than a year. And if the company can only get a 1 year permit, I'm not sure I understand the situation, and how it would involve Mark, your company here.
Yeah, let's coming back to the country, how to explain all this U.S. immigration. Again, this person's looking to come. I think they'd be looking to come back. One thing I want to emphasize: we're trying to talk about a one-way ticket to Canada. It's not I'm jumping back and forth across the border. It's like if I could put the slide back up of H-1B versus global TAL stream. It's like pick the country that's more immigrant friendly. Pick the one that gives you permanent residence in 2 years. Pick the one that makes you a citizen in 4. It's not about, okay, I'm there for a year, then I'm coming back. What's the U.S. immigration going to say? My answer is, why would you care what they have to say? If you get your permanent residence in 2 and your citizenship in 4, you come back to the U.S. on a TN visa as a Canadian citizen. There's no issue. There's no issue at all. Haven't started green card process yet. If you did and you found out how long it would take, then maybe you might look at the situation and be like, the American situation, immigration is ridiculous. Like, this is completely unfair. No wonder they showed how good Canada is. I know we're down to our last couple minutes here. So when you get terminated from a U.S. job, so this person, if say they move to Canada, Sindisa sponsors a work visa, and then the U.S. company's like, maybe they're VC back, and they're like, look, we're running out of money. We're doing a mass layoff. If that's the situation you're talking about, that's happened. We've had people who the U.S. company said, I'm sorry, I had to terminate the worker. We moved them up 6 months ago. As Daniel said, then you're in Canada, you've got a work permit. You can go shop yourself to other Canadian companies. We'll try and find you a job, but you're not going to get kicked out of Canada that same day like the U.S. would do. But you're right. You don't have a salary. You're sitting in Canada without a salary. So then you're either Syndesis tries to help you find another job, or you go to Canadian companies and say, look, I've got a work visa. I'm here. I've got amazing skills. In some case, and we've had people in that situation. Some took a few months. They found their job. They're like, I'm good. The best case, I had dinner with someone. We moved up, and at dinner, to my shock, she's like, Mark, I got laid off. The U.S. company ran into financial trouble. And I'm like, oh no. And she's like, yeah, I'm sad about that, but I got my PR 2 weeks ago. So I'm set. No problem. I'll find a job with any Canadian company because I have PR. And I'm like, how long did it take? And she's like, about 1.5 years. And I'm like, how would that work in the US? No. So the idea is get to Canada, get your PR, get anchored, get your citizenship, do whatever you want then. But you're going to have to stay in Canada. And I think the same person asked the same question. If we sponsor work visa and move you to Canada, Syndesis is an employer of record in Canada. We collect and remit taxes to the Canadian government, employer and employee. You're not a consultant. You're not a contractor. We hire people as Canadian employees. You are subject to Canadian laws. We collect employer and employee taxes and pay them to the Canadian government. The US company pays us. We pay you. There's no US taxation involved. You're not in the US. You're a remote global employer. When your US tax person says, how do we do this? IRS form W8BEN, they're like, oh, yep, international employee, got it, not subject to US taxation. There is no US taxation anymore. You're living and residing in Canada. Last question here they had, you're staying and working not in Canada and not the US. Exactly. Your company can be Austin, Phoenix, doesn't matter. They're a US company with no presence in Canada. That's why we use Syndesis as the middleman. We're a Canadian company. We employ Canadians legally in Canada for US companies. So we handle that piece completely. And I think the last question here, I think we'll take this one last one. If you have a closed work permit in Canada and you're laid off, but that's the scenario we're talking about. You go find someone else, it has our name on it. You go try and find someone else to sponsor your work visa, and then we can help you. I would say these are good questions. Anonymously, I would say book a call with, I'll put the last slide up here. Just reach out to connect@syndesis.com, book a call with Syndesis team. We'll walk you through all of this. These are good questions from someone that I see that's trying to navigate, like, how does this work? Is it possible? Will this work for me? I'd say book a call and get live with someone from our team. We can walk you through these scenarios. If it sounds good, we'll get your employer on the call and we can walk through and set this up. Daniel, I appreciate you staying late on a work night to answer questions. Immigration, this is your world, it's complicated. One thing you said early in the call, you're like, what codes do you use? We always recommend people talk to an immigration professional. You've been doing this for over a decade. You have all the answers. As we said for everyone, book a call.
Not all of them. I hope I have a lot of them.
Many answers.
Many answers. If I had all the answers, I don't know if I'd be doing this for a living. But yes, I've got a lot of answers. And it's always a pleasure to work with you, Mark.
And thanks for joining. And yeah, again, what we're hoping on this call is someone says, okay, one of those personas is me. That's me. That's my situation. I'm out of options. Green card, never going to get one, or OPT expired. Syndesis can help. We've been doing this for 6 years, moved over 100 people to Canada. Please reach out and book a call. We'll walk you through the solutions one-on-one and help. I see 11 of you stayed on this late. We appreciate that. Thank you for the good questions and for the time. Again, next step, reach out to us. We'll get a call booked with the team. We'll walk you through your options. Thanks for spending time with us. Thank you, Mark, for hosting and inviting me again to participate in this panel discussion. Thanks, Daniel. Oh, and we'll also send an email out with a recording to everyone who attended. Thank you all very much. All right. And I will pause recording.